FDR and the New Deal. FDR was elected in 1932 and took office in 1933. He had beaten Hoover in the 1932 election. FDR was a privileged lawyer. He came from a privileged family. He had been the governor of New York. And he had contracted polio in the early 1920s, so he couldn't stand or walk very well. This is thought to have contributed to his understanding of suffering. He's very charismatic. He interacts with the working class very well. In 1933, he will give his inaugural speech. And what he says in his speech is intended to calm the fears of the American people. One of the very famous lines from his speech is, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." He's trying to instill confidence in the American system. He's trying to instill confidence in his administration. He will go on to give fireside chats. These are conversations with the American people that he has on the radio. In these fireside chats, he will constantly assure the American people that everything is going to be all right. He tells the American people everything that he does to alleviate their fears and to instill confidence in him. FDR handles the Great Depression very differently than Hoover did. He treated the country like it was wartime, and that he was using his powers as commander-in-chief. So first of all, he passes emergency legislation, which is counter to the type of government that we had prior to his presidency. After Wilson, we had gone back to this laissez-faire form of government, hands-off by the government. He is moving back to hands-on government intervention. He will initiate the Banking Relief Act, also called the Bank Holiday, where all of the banks were shut down to prevent a run on the banks. What was happening is people were fearful that they were going to lose their money, so they went and pulled out all of their money, which created a crisis. Because if they didn't pull out their money, the banks couldn't cover that. At that time, that was not the way that it worked. But if they pulled their money out, then the banks couldn't help other people either. They wouldn't have money for other people either. So it was a problem. But he only closes the banks for a day. And he tells the American people in his fireside chat that he is going to do this and why. FDR ends the banking crisis. So FDR's task for the government is putting people back to work, getting them support. So he will launch the New Deal. The New Deal consisted of recovery, relief, regulation, and reform. Recovery, he initiated what was called the National Recovery Administration. What this administration did was to help both the industries and agriculture. It's to help them get back on their feet, help them to stabilize their products. You also initiate the Agricultural Adjustment Act, or the AAA. The intent of this was to help farmers, particularly those that were suffering in the Midwest in the Dust Bowl. And what it did was it paid farmers not to plant. So what he wanted to do was to have the soil recover and to bring in experts to teach the farmers how to take care of the soil so this situation wouldn't happen again. But in order to do that, he needed to pay the farmers to plant because it was instinctual for farmers to plant. Because if they didn't plant, they couldn't earn money. Relief included federal construction projects. The picture you see here is the Cooley Dam. The others included the Tennessee Valley Authority and various parks and so forth. So what he did was he made agreements with industries to build public projects, to build roads, dams, and so forth. And those businesses who did that would hire people to work those projects. So he gets the businesses on track, he gets the people who need jobs on track, and the community benefits from the project. Regulations included the FDIC. The FDIC is basically insurance. If you've ever gone to a bank, you always see FDIC insured, and that's where this comes from. It's to protect the consumer. So if the banks go bankrupt or close, then the consumer's money is protected. He also established the SEC to help prevent another stock market crash, to help make sure that people are being honest with respect to the stock market. And then reform was Social Security. Social Security is something that we have even today. Social Security was not intended as a retirement program. It's really turned into a retirement program, but it initially was not intended as that. It was intended as a safety net for people, a temporary safety net. But it turned into something far as much opposition to the New Deal. Some felt that FDR was acting like a dictator, that because much of his legislation was being done via executive power. Others felt that the legislation was unconstitutional because only the Congress has the power to pass legislation. FDR was also packing the court, meaning he wanted to add additional justices to the Supreme Court because he knew that some of his legislation might not be constitutional, and that if he were to add justices that would favor his legislation, that the legislation would be okay. Others thought the government was competing with private industry, meaning that they were shutting out private industry from the public sector. And then finally, many thought that he was just helping his elite buddies. This concludes the New Deal. Please let me know if you have any questions.